Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. So my name's Ariana Paddock. I work here at Peace Corps in the Office of Innovation. And today we're really excited to have Drishtie Patel with us. She is the Missing Maps Coordinator and GIS Analyst for the American Red Cross. And I'm going to let her explain all of that and exactly what that means. So here you go.
Oh, thanks, Ariana. So my name is Drishtie, Missing Maps Coordinator at the American Red Cross. And basically, I run a project that helps to put open data on the OpenStreetMap, which is the Wikipedia of maps. Part of what I do is it's a 3-step process. We get remote volunteers around basically the world to go in and look at satellite imagery and draw in shapes based on what they're looking at on imagery. And then we go into the communities that we're actually mapping remotely and have local volunteers add data. So adding in things like road names and buildings and points of interest. We collect data based on whatever projects are working. So if we're doing a health project, we collect basically locations for all the clinics. We'll collect borehole points and basically anything that would apply to what project is happening on the ground. And so humanitarian organizations will end up using that open data that's on there, and all the information that we collect for OpenStreetMap is out for other people to use, including the communities themselves and local governments in the area, and basically anyone that needs to access information about remote areas. How I got the job, I basically have always knew I was going to be in humanitarian work, but came to DC on a whim and didn't quite apply for jobs before I came here. So I came here actually working for Apple, and kind of loved it for a long time. And so I was there for about 3 years and happened to go through multiple promotions to a point where I was asked to either be a manager or I would be leaving DC. And having realized that's what I came for, I started to look at opportunities again in the nonprofit world. It happened to speak to somebody that was at the Red Cross, and they told me about the GIS department. And so I looked up what they had available and spoke to the team, and they were starting a new project. And I applied, and that's kind of how that happened. And Missing Maps was still an idea when I started, so it was a bit of a risk that it wasn't really a project that was going to happen, but it was really exciting, and I wanted to do it anyway, so I took it and moved here on actually a temporary contract. Wasn't a full-time job, but luckily project ended up going pretty well, and I got to stay, and now I lead the project, which is pretty exciting. That's pretty much been my time in DC. I think, and I was asked to give some advice, and I'm going to go through with it. I was also in the same organization at the University of Central Florida and went to one of the conventions, and I think mine was in Louisville, Kentucky. So it was an interesting place, and a good reason for me to visit Louisville, because I don't think I would have just done that on a whim. But I think the key for job applications is doing a lot of research, and there's a lot of sending resumes blankly to people. But if you do have the opportunity to talk to people, or you can use networks like alumni groups, or sometimes just walking in and seeing if there's someone available to chat, looking on LinkedIn, I think it's super helpful to have a point of contact, not only to get into an organization, but to also get an idea of the culture of the organization that you're going into. That was super important. And I think your success highly depends on the environment you're in and the type of work environment it is. And if that's important to you, you want to look at that before you join, because it's going to determine, the next couple of months or next couple of years of your career and your life. So that would be my piece of advice. And I think we had a couple of questions.
Yeah, definitely. So we have one question from Molly. And she asks, what do you think is your greatest accomplishment with the Missing Maps project?
Okay, sorry, I didn't like.
No worries. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Sorry for the technical difficulty, guys. So we have a question from Molly, and she asks, what do you think is your greatest accomplishment with the Missing Maps project?
So it's not really my accomplishment. The nice thing about it is that I've been lucky to have a really great team that I work with. And it's never one person that I think achieves anything, especially bigger projects and in huge organizations. It's really a team effort. So I think mine would be, my greatest accomplishment is just working with different teams. And so it is a project that works across countries. The partners are British Red Cross, Community on OpenStreetMap, Doctors Without Borders in the UK, and American Red Cross. And since we've had new partners from other countries, so it's a lot of communication and coordinating, and basically trying to work with different environments and different organizations that have very different cultures and ways of working. So it's just been a really great experience learning about how other people work and trying to find a really good balance of, meeting everybody's wishes and deadlines and roles, but also achieving something. At the American Red Cross, we also work with, we do a lot of the community mapping, which is basically going into countries and building capacity by training local volunteers and local Red Cross staff, getting in touch with the OpenStreetMap community. So it's a lot of communication, a lot of being in touch, a lot of coordinating and getting people in touch as well. After we finish a project, we usually coordinate with other organizations that might be in the area, just to let them know that there's now a bunch of trained volunteers and really, good stuff happening, and so they can kind of tap into the same resources and start to build a community of their own in country.
Awesome, thank you. So another follow-up question is, what would you think is the one thing that you love the most about your job? And then also, what is your biggest challenge in your current role?
Okay, so my answer is actually going to be the same thing. So while, and it's travel, I get to travel a ton. I'm usually not in the same place for more than 2 weeks. So we're, traveling to host mapathons within the US with different corporate partners and universities and groups, but we also travel to other countries. We're working on projects, and they're very short trips, but very intense, long days. And while I absolutely love traveling, and it has been my dream to have a job that lets me go to these places, which are super remote and areas you would never go on vacation to, so it's absolutely fabulous. I think that's also been a challenge, is balancing work and my personal life. It's simple things like being able to go to friends' weddings, or, missing nieces and nephews' birthdays, and your usual friend brunches every Sunday. So it does come at a cost, but so the same thing that I absolutely love also ends up being a bit of a challenge sometimes.
Yeah, I'm sure, with a schedule like that.
Yeah.
And another follow-up question for you. Do you have any advice for students who are trying to break into the field of networking? Let's say, for example, they've never really done networking before. How to network? How do you follow up after a networking event, something like that? Especially for those students who are closer to graduating or maybe in their junior years.
Right. So I don't know how true this is of everybody, but I absolutely hate, I'm not the type of person that would go to an event just to try to meet people, and I found it very uncomfortable. It's not really my personality. And there were a lot of those opportunities at my I did take the I took the opportunity to go to some, but it was a hard thing to want to go to. I think the key to networking is just finding genuine relationships, and that's worked for me. It may be different for everybody, but if I did find somebody that I connected with, and had a lot in common with, or felt like they would be a good mentor, whether or not I was thinking of applying to a job, I try to maintain that relationship. So if it meant, checking in every couple of months and, just seeing how people are doing, and it's kind of worked for me. Every job that I have gotten in the past couple of years, I'm trying to think, has always been because of a person, like kind of knowing who you are and your background and your educational, your history, but it's more so because they know you as a person, and kind of how you communicate and deal with, I think just being a good person, or just knowing your personality, your strengths and your weaknesses, which is not something that I think is easy to explain in an interview, but having those relationships with people, I think, are super vital. Whether they end up helping you into a job or connect you to someone else, I think that's super helpful. I think if you do end up getting informational interviews, which is kind of a big way to get a foot in the door, I think somebody told me this, and it's been very helpful, is ask them for one other person. So before you leave, your action items would be to follow the advice they're taking, and continue with what they're saying, but also ask them if they know someone else that might be just as helpful or that they could recommend you to speak to. And I think that's been good advice that was given to me.
Yeah, definitely. And another follow-up with that, in terms of these students who are looking to maybe go into your field of like GIS and analysis or mapping, what kinds of things do you recommend them participating in as an undergraduate to prepare them well for this kind of career?
I think internships are the key. There's so many different types of jobs, even within GIS, and it's just every organization is going to work very differently, and even within an organization, jobs or roles for each person. So if you are thinking of being somewhere, I would try doing internships or volunteer time, because you really get a true essence of what it is they do. And it's a good way to also enhance your skills, because once you're there, you'll see like what kind of programs they're using or what they're working with. A lot of organizations that we work around with use a lot of open source tools and open source data, which is not very widely taught in school. But it's very useful, and when you do go to job interviews, those are the kinds of questions they'll be asking. For example, do you use QGIS, which is a GIS software, an open source tool? Just knowing how to use those, and just understanding, every single interview that we have, the first thing we do is, have you heard of OpenStreetMap? Do you have a user account? How much editing have you done? And we'll actually check on that. So we'll go through and see if we have a username, if they're good at editing. So I think it's very valuable to at least find out what they're doing. If you don't have the opportunity to volunteer or intern, at least try to speak to someone to get an idea of what they do, and that way you can start enhancing your skills and working towards what they're looking for in a candidate.
Okay, great. And so a little bit ago, you were talking about getting to go to the field a lot and traveling. Can you maybe walk us through what a typical day in the field looks like, or what your field assignments look like? I know you said they're really long, intense days.
Sure. So we try to teach GIS and mapping to volunteers that sometimes have never used a computer. So the intensity level is high for one, that would be one variable, but also you're in very remote areas that don't always have amenities like power, water, or high-speed internet is almost unheard of in most of these places. And the idea is to build that technical skill, but also to use tools that are open and free so that they can actually continue doing it when you leave, but to also teach these tools without internet. And so it's a little bit challenging sometimes, and we've created tools of our own to basically work around that and have a lot of offline. We use programs that don't require Wi-Fi. But when we typically do go to a field, we spend 3 days training in class, and so we go over all the theory and what is OpenStreetMap, and a very quick snippet of what GIS is and how it relates to them, because at the end of the day, you want to basically relate it to what's happening on the field to have a more engaged community and volunteer base. And then we head out to the field, which is basically collecting data on every single feature that you can see. So the same way you can open up your phone and look at where the nearest Starbucks is or what road you're on or the directions, because none of this base information is available for most of the world, it's impossible to do that. So if you're trying to do a program or basically respond to a disaster without that information, it's almost impossible, especially for larger areas. And so we're trying to collect that kind of data, and so we go down to the very specifics of, you know, what is the house number? If there is a house number, sometimes there's no address system. And we even collect things like the type of homes and the materials that it's made of, the road conditions, because weather can affect roads, especially if they're not tarred, which they usually aren't. And so if there's a flood, those roads are not usable. And if there's only one road into a village, that becomes a challenge to get in and out of when the weather gets bad. So basically we're collecting everything. And so they're out for 8 hours a day, taking down information on a mobile phone and a paper backup, you know, every single thing that they see. And we do that for about 7 or 8 days usually to cover the most ground, and then come back and then we input that data back into the computer. At the end of Tuesday, we come back to our hotels or wherever we're staying and basically go and verify the data that was checked in that day, and we upload what we can. And we also take Mapillary, which is a video camera of the area. So it's like the Google cars, but we basically put it onto one of our Red Cross vehicles that drives around all day, and we were able to get video image or photo images of the area, so we can use that to also verify data, but we put that into an open source platform as well, which is Mapillary, and other people can see it as well. So there's a lot of different things going into field work.
Wow, that does sound like a very challenging schedule, but also super interesting.
Yeah, it's lovely. The people are great.
Yeah, I'm sure. Can you maybe talk a little bit about how your work has been used to respond to some disasters or some humanitarian responses through the Red Cross in the recent history?
So the reason Missing Maps was created was to map areas that are deemed vulnerable because we're trying to prevent an issue or be more prepared if there is a disaster. And that's the reason, is because we use a lot of OSM data for response. So for example, when Nepal hit, the earthquake happened, there were tons of volunteers all over the world that basically went onto OpenStreetMap and started mapping. But as you can imagine, a disaster is not the time to coordinate volunteers. There's no way you can verify what's going on and ground truth all of that data in such a quick span with everything else that's happening in country. So the projects we've been working on are areas that are vulnerable but have not been hit yet, working towards basically just filling in all these gaps should anything happen, we're prepared. But they're also working with projects where we have basically resilience programming. So based on every area, that resilience program is going to look a little bit different. So it could be training people in first aid or having disaster response teams from the community for different purposes. So whether it's flooding or fires is a huge thing. So just training volunteers how to do that. Hygiene habits, like, you know, how to keep good hygiene, things like that. So luckily we have not had a disaster in any of the areas.
Yeah, that's great. I'm checking now to see if there's any more questions, but it looks like we've covered everything that the interns had to say. But I guess any other last pieces of advice or fun anecdotes you want to share with them?
I think just have a good time. I remember being super stressful in the last year of college because you're really trying to, like, you know, figure out your entire life, but you don't have to, because, you know, things will change very quickly. And you never know, something you've studied for 4 years and you could end up in a completely different place and absolutely love it. So just keep an open mind, and as much as there's all this pressure around you to get a job and be in the right place at the right time, just enjoy yourself and do things that you like, and you'll most likely be successful.
Great. Well, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to share your thoughts with us. I know all the interns really appreciate it.
Cool. Well, thank you for having me.
Of course.
Good luck, everyone.
All right. Have a good day.
Too. Bye.
Bye.